Now, there was a briefing yesterday afternoon with Matt Hancock. Boris Johnson, of course, is in day 2 of his self-isolation because he was in contact with one Lee Anderson MP last week in a meeting in Downing Street where not only he but 5 other MPs are now self-isolating. Lee Anderson, of course, has got coronavirus. We wish him well. Hopefully he'll make a speedy recovery from it. It won't affect him too badly. But things are not going brilliantly, are they? After the sort of maelstrom of the weekend where Dominic Cummings left the building, as it were, with a box clutched in his hands when he went home for the last time, never to return, when, of course, Lee Kane, the guy that's been running communications out of Downing Street, has also gone. Nobody's really sure who's in charge of the clattering train. So let's talk to Stewart Jackson, founder, director and strategic counsel at Political Insight, former Conservative MP, of course. Stuart, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
So, I'm not quite sure where to begin, really. I was thinking about talking to you this morning, and I thought to myself, well, Stuart will have a view on Brexit, obviously, which we'll talk about. Stuart will also have a view on the running of the office of the Prime Minister, which nobody's really sure about right now. But let's kick off, first of all, with these noises that are being made about possibly the lockdown not really working. I mean, I know it's early days, and I know that some people are saying, let's wait another week or so to see whether these figures are going to get better. But we're being told at the moment, and it feels like we're being softened up for a bit more of a lockdown.
I don't think that is going to be politically possible for Boris. I think that there are many Conservative MPs who took the view that they were lending him their vote on the 4th of November to agree the second national lockdown, which he and the cabinet had specifically said wasn't going to happen, and that they're not going to countenance agreeing to it again. And I think it would be very poor management of the parliamentary party and the government if you had upwards of 60, maybe 80 or 90 Tory MPs voting against a further lockdown. I just think he is committed to it. He has to, I think, and the cabinet have to adopt a policy where they accept you can ameliorate and amend the effect of COVID. You can't stop it. You can't eradicate it other than by a vaccine, where it will die off of its own accord. And I think that is the problem. That's the constant fight that the politicians are having with the scientists, because I thought it was about prudently managing the COVID pandemic. It seems to be about now potentially causing huge economic damage in order to eradicate the pandemic. And that is just impossible. It's not going to happen.
No, quite. And I wonder, and this leads us on, I guess, to Dominic Cummings and his grip on Downing Street and his grip on the Prime Minister. I mean, we are told that he was very much one of those who was in favour of lockdowns, in favour of trying to suppress the virus. With him out of the way, is it possible that Boris might now somehow flex his muscles a bit more and bring us more back into a normal kind of way of going? My worry about it at the moment is that, you know, the whole testing regime was meant to be available to people so that they could get a test, which, if it was negative, could get them back into work. He seems to be using the testing regime and the self-isolation as the reason not to.
I think he and the cabinet probably, on reflection, did not absorb all the data that was available before they made the decision to have the national lockdown, the second national lockdown. I think there wasn't enough credence given to the impact, the efficacy of the tiered system, tier 1, 2 and 3. They were beginning to work. There was real-time information that they needed to look at again. And I think the scientists panicked, and that was really unfortunate. And obviously, as you say, there's been a maelstrom of infighting in number 10 over the last 3 or 4 months. And that hasn't obviously been good. There's been an alienation by the parliamentary party and a feeling of MPs being very angry and frustrated. For instance, if you look at the free school meals debacle with Marcus Rashford, you know, it's not great if you push your MPs out there to put the party line, to put a coherent policy forward, and then they look round and the ministers aren't there, and then a day later the government capitulates. After a while, MPs begin to think, well, I'm not going to go out on a limb in my local media to defend a policy when the government is going to U-turn. And I think that corrosive element in terms of morale and strength of the government, it's crazy, really, because, I mean, the government's got an 80-seat majority and, you know, max headroom, Keir Starmer is...
I got that reference.
Yeah, I mean, he's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy, and I think the Labour Party have got a huge distance to go before they're a credible opposition, let alone a government. So, I think Boris just needs to count his blessings, really. And I would say that with a Brexit deal and with a COVID vaccine, he has got two important platforms to reset and relaunch the government.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, Keir Starmer, very, very little impact being made by him at the moment. It's almost as though he's not even there. He sort of pops up every so often and the media insist on interviewing him for no apparent reason, and where he says nothing particularly important. And nobody really remembers what he said when he does say it.
No, I don't think that the Labour Party are covering themselves with glory. Having said that, they have taken a view, generally speaking, that they're going to support the government. It is a national emergency and a national economic and health crisis, and indeed an international crisis. So, I think Boris has got really free rein to potentially reset the clock and start again. But that will depend, as I say, on getting next week the makings of a Brexit deal, which I think is certainly there in the offing, although it will be tough and it will be bloody. And obviously the great news of the vaccine will help. I think also, of course, the AstraZeneca-Oxford vaccine trials are imminent. And that could be a sort of triple whammy of good news on vaccines. But obviously we need to purchase them and get them out into the health system. And I think that is a huge logistical endeavour.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And as far as the business at hand, I mean, we're talking this week apparently about Boris Johnson doing Prime Minister's questions remotely by Zoom. I'm not quite sure how that will work. I suspect it will be a sort of giant waste of time, really. But what about the business of Brexit? Because obviously this is a big week. Nigel Farage was on the show yesterday saying, Boris really should be out there front and centre, taking control of these Brexit negotiations, because in the end, even the EU have conceded. It's down to him as to what the deal is.
I agree with Nigel Farage in the respect that the Prime Minister should be front and centre, but that is usually right at the end of the process. My experience is that even in the days of Theresa May, she only got on the plane to fly to Northern Ireland when the Northern Ireland Protocol was signed, when it looked as if the withdrawal agreement that she signed was ready to go, right at the end. And I do think that both Emmanuel Macron and specifically Angela Merkel will be in what they call the tunnel with Boris right at the end of the process. But I don't think it will be this week or even next week. I think it will be late November, early December. It'll be right at the last minute. Obviously, David Davis was ridiculed when I worked for him for saying that, the important stuff will be done in the last 10 minutes rather than the previous 10 months. And I think he's going to be proven right. That will happen. I think COVID has actually made a deal much more likely. And of course, to an extent, the Joe Biden presidency as well.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of all of that? Because, of course, we're being told that Donald Trump is still basically denying that he's lost. He's still claiming that he's going to be suing all sorts of people. But it's been going for 2 weeks now, hasn't it? And, there doesn't seem to be much changing, really.
Well, I'm afraid he's in danger of becoming like that Japanese soldier in the Philippines jungle in 1974, who 29 years after the war ended, still thinks he's fighting the imperial enemy. Unless he can come up with demonstrably coherent and credible legal cases particularly in Pennsylvania, but also in maybe Michigan and Arizona, to suggest that he won those states, then, he hasn't really got a case. And I do think, if you're putting me on the spot, Mike, Trump could actually rescue his reputation to an extent if he were to give a barnstorming, gracious, historic speech to say, I did my best, I made massive changes to the United States.
Which I don't think there's any doubt that he did. And it's a very close run thing as well, isn't it? I mean, whoever ends up being declared the winner here, I mean, there's not much in it.
No, it's very close, but it's not close enough. Biden is winning Pennsylvania, probably Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, by big margins, not 500 votes, but 12, 14, 28,000. Trump's people have got to prove that number and more were wrongly cast, illegally cast, personation, all the rest of it. And I think that's going to be very, very difficult. And if Trump's not careful, he's going to diminish what good things he did do. He made the Germans think about spending more on defense. He stood up to the Chinese. He grew employment in the United States, particularly amongst minority groups. There are some very strong aspects of his record, but that will be obliterated if he's literally pulled, kicking and screaming out the White House on the 20th of January.
Yeah, but there have also been, I suppose, a lot of reasons for him why he shouldn't be particularly gracious to people who spent the best part of the last 4 years trying to undermine his authority and his presidency.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, the same people that hate Trump hate Boris Johnson, and they have a platform, they have the liberal media. I mean, CNN has been an utter disgrace.
Oh, totally, yeah.
In its editorialising.
Well, to be honest, Sky's not far behind them, really.
No, well, Sky, of course, is owned by Comcast, which is a sort of woke TV, and pushes all this identity politics and this social liberalism. And of course, they hate Trump and want to get rid of him. And Sky, of course, are doing their best to undermine Boris Johnson and his government. But nevertheless, as John Major, and I don't quote him very often, when the curtain falls, get off the stage. The people have spoken, and Trump's got to accept that. And it's regrettable from his point of view, because, of course, if he'd performed better in the first debate and COVID had not come along, I know they're two big ifs, but he probably would have won a solid victory in the presidential election.
Yeah, very possibly. But let's talk some more about where Boris goes from here, because technically speaking, if he's going to be sort of sitting in his room for the next week and a half, more or less, we then get to December the 2nd. Are you saying that you can't see them extending any sort of lockdown then?
I think there would be quite a significant cabinet revolt. From people I talk to, it's not an option, because there will have to be a battle royal between the politicians and the scientists. And ultimately, the scientists are there to give their advice and to proffer evidence that they can prove. But the decision has to be with the government and with ministers.
Yeah.
And I just cannot see that the evidence is there to semi-permanently close the economy until the new year, coming up to the most important holiday season in the UK. Now, what you said about Matt Hancock, that's very good news about meeting older loved ones in care homes. But, we cannot support a social care system and an NHS if we've got an economy that's ruined and permanently scarred. And what we need to see is definitely a Treasury analysis and impact assessment of another lockdown before it's even considered. But I think it's unconscionable, and I just don't think he'll get it through his own party.
No, I think he needs to now take the view that he listens to the scientists, but he also listens to his backbench MPs, and he also listens perhaps to other people in the cabinet who are less sure that what has been happening over the course of the last 7 or 8 months has been the right way to go. Because surely what we need, Stuart, as you said, is a bit more of a flexible kind of approach to business, to opening up places, to allowing people to work. Given that now we are in so much better shape in terms of testing and in terms of knowing what's going on.
Well, I don't even think people are observing this lockdown, Mike. I mean, I've gone out and about, I'm in a regional city. I'm not in London, but it's nothing like it was in March.
Oh, not at all, no.
Yeah.
Well, no,
March and April,
there was no change.
It was like zombie apocalypse. Yeah. I mean, there was no one on the street, nothing happening. You go out now, people are in the park, people are going into shops, businesses and commerce is booming, people are on building sites. I think people are washing their hands and they are keeping space. But I don't see it as a comparison. So I think they'll be even less prepared to support a third lockdown if in fact that happens, which would be a disaster. Yeah,
exactly right. Thank you very much indeed. Stewart Jackson there talking to us from the Political Insight Organisation, former Conservative MP, founder, director and strategic council of that particular organisation. The bottom line for me is that if the scientists are starting to say, well, the lockdown's not working, so we might have to make the lockdown last longer, surely there's something wrong with the logic of that statement. Because if the lockdown isn't working, it's because the lockdown doesn't work, surely. not because it hasn't been going for long enough, not because nobody's doing what they're supposed to do, because most people who are out and about, most people who are running businesses are doing so within the law, within the rules, within the safeguards that have been put out there by the government. But there's an awful lot more people this time around who are not willing to make no money whatsoever because the government tells them to work from home or not to work at all. That's simply not happening.